Dr. Ebony, I'm so thrilled to see you again. So we had such a great live. Yeah, thank you for coming to do the podcast.
Yes, and thank you so much for inviting me. I think that we had a conversation on live that was actually amazing, and I'm just happy to be able to follow up because it was so rich. It was so much information. That
I know it was. It was a fantastic live. So guys, you can go listen to the live. It's on my IGTV, and now we've got the podcast so you can dive even deeper. It's wonderful. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I've just kind of been doing appointments all day, and so my mind is in therapy mode, and so I'm okay.
And now
How about you?
Good. I've been doing interviews all day, so I'm in interview mode. I've had such interesting talks today, so I'm really glad to talk to you as well. It's been a fantastic day, and it was perfectly topped off with your interviews. So thank you so much. So, okay, just tell your listeners, those that haven't heard you before, just tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, what's not in your bio, what motivates you to do what you do.
Yes. So what motivates me, I think that's a good place to start. I'm really motivated about educating people, about educating myself. And I always tell people this story about my sister. When we were little, she came home and she used to teach me everything that she knows.
Aww.
And so she would teach me. And so I was ahead in school when
That's so
I finally
cute.
got to the age that she was. Yeah. And so what motivates me is being able to provide that to other people in the same ways that she provided it to me. And so I do that by therapy. I do that in my food relationship coaching. And so I think that the way that I think about things, people tend to find it helpful. And I would like to just provide that to people and disseminate that as much as I can, especially to communities of color, especially to Black women, as those are my passion populations. And so just being able to help them thrive in trauma recovery, being able to recognize kind of like their worth and empower them. And sometimes that means calling attention to things that we might not even know is oppressing us.
That is so good. Calling attention to those things that might be oppressing us and we don't even know that. Those non-conscious things that are down there and influencing our behavior and stuff. So yeah, if we don't know about them, we can't change them. So that's so important. That's really great. And I love the fact that your sister taught you everything in advance of learning it at school. So you could always be the superstar there.
Yeah. And so she's kind of like in the background. And so she's here this weekend helping me ship out the therapy card.
Yes, congratulations. I saw on your page that you've just got them arrived, that they've just arrived.
They are arriving and they are a lot. They're massive. And so my family came in town this weekend to help me ship them. So she's always just been in the background. And I want her to be like a presence like me and just kind of be in front of the camera and talking, but she's not. And so she just basically, as we've always done, she just taught me what she knows. And I kind of talk a lot. And so I just kind of...
It's perfect. It's perfect relationship. Isn't that wonderful? I love that. That's amazing. It's good to have those kind of people in your life. I have that as well. My husband's in the business and he's the same. And I've got two of my 4 children. My 2 daughters are, in fact, my one daughter's the producer. I call her the boss. But it's so great having that relationship where you have people that you love and you know you can rely on, and they just make things work, So it's just amazing. They make it work so we can talk. It's great. So you are a psychologist, and then this is one of my favorite ways of saying it, food relationship strategist. That's just such a great way. Instead of saying a food therapist or, like all those scary words like anorexia and everything, you talk about being a food relationship strategist. And I love that. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes. So I started this business, so back in 2015, as it plays within my sister. My sister and myself created a business called My Sister's Keeper. And My Sister's Keeper, it was a business where we were going to help women learn how to become healthier, learn how to lose weight, learn how to eat, and that kind of thing. And then as we began to shift and understand really about diet culture and really the oppressiveness of it, I really realized a lot of the harm that the health and wellness industry typically kind of disseminates. And I just did not want to be a part of that. And I didn't want to call myself a health and wellness coach because I feel like everybody was calling themselves that. And I know that paired with my background as a psychologist, I bring something different to the space. And I was like, I don't really want to also coach people in that I feel like I'm the expert in telling them what they need to do. I feel like people have agency to be able to make these decisions on their own. And maybe we can work alongside each other to kind of come up with things that they could do to help kind of tap into that. And I also realized that clients are the expert. They're the expert of their own lives, and everything will not work for everyone.
Yeah. There's no cookie cutter formula. Yeah.
No cookie cutter. So I found myself in session literally strategizing. Some people call it brainstorming. Some people call it kind of working through. We were actually strategizing ways that we can help this person engage in health-seeking behaviors outside of weight loss and those types of things. And so it's exactly what it is. It's strategizing, and we're strategizing together about your relationship with food. So I felt like that was a perfect match, and I didn't have to tie myself to the health and wellness industry. I felt like it was a blend of both what I do as a psychologist and a food relationship person. So that's how the name was born.
Brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's very freeing. It's very hopeful. It's not threatening. It just means that, hey, we can get a plan going here. We can work this out. There's and the agent, I love the agency thing. You know, with the research that I do, I just finished some clinical trials. I think I told you last time, one of the big things was empowerment. It was literally creating a pathway to empowerment. And part of that empowerment is the ability to get awareness. And you mentioned earlier on, you can't change what you're not aware of. But then once you're aware, you need to then realize that you've got control. So awareness leads to control, which then leads to the ability to change things. And that's how we become empowered. You know, so this is what, as a strategist, that word makes me think of, I can be aware and I can control. And then I feel better about it, you know, and it's a forward moving. There's no judgment. Yeah.
There's a little judgment associated with it. And as you think about coach, you're like, oh, I need to be perfect. So this person sees me as well. This person sees me as good enough. And so it creates that kind of that power differential that we see sometimes that makes people feel ashamed and guilty. And I don't want anybody to feel like that. I want you to come to the table like, okay, let's come up with this. And then we have flexibility to change it if it doesn't work.
That's good.
That's what strategy is about.
Exactly. Being strategic is the ability to have a possibilities mindset and to keep changing and have expectation mindset too. So that's really amazing. Okay, so you help women learn how to build healthier relationships with food. So you basically do it through strategizing. So can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think you've kind of touched on the basic concept. So maybe just give us a little bit more about sort of just a couple of techniques or tips or how you'd go about the process.
Absolutely. Part of the first part of what we do is education around what a food relationship is, because we don't really talk about our food in terms of us having a relationship with it. Yes. We'll have a relationship with our hair. I know for a lot of Black women, we have a real intimate relationship with our hair. Yeah. We have a relationship with our partners. We have relationships with friends. We even have relationships with fashion, but we don't really talk about relationships with food. And so a part of that is the education around it and setting the expectations and defining what that actually looks like. And so if we define a relationship is defined as a connection, the interaction between two or more things. So basically that goes for anything. And so how we're interacting with each other, because food interacts with our bodies. Mm-hmm. It impacts our bodies. We interact with food, and what we do can impact our food source. And so basically that relationship and how it is effective. And another part of the conversation when we're educating is around, why are we focusing on the food relationship and not just weight loss? Because typically when people come to me, they're coming to me because they've associated me with weight loss, because that's our conditioning. And so
you talk about food and people think weight loss. Yeah.
Yeah. People think weight loss, that's our conditioning. I mean, the industry has done a brilliant job of marketing and conditioning us in that regard. And so when people come, we're like, okay, so we're not focusing on weight loss because weight loss doesn't really help with much around your relationship with food. It's like if you were in a relationship with somebody and the immediacy, the thing that you do when you get the number or you go to them and say, okay, now how are our children how are we going to parent? Or how is our wedding going to look? And it's like, well, what? We literally just met. And so that's the thing that we jump right into it. That's how weight loss is with food, right? It's an immediacy. It's an urgency. It's a result driven thing instead of a connection driven aspect.
That is very important. Yeah, I love that. It's a connection-driven thing versus a results-driven thing.
Yes, because then from where I sit as a psychologist, it's important for me to understand why we do the things that we do. From my own journey in weight loss, I recognize that it's a lot of mental. It's a large part that's mental in weight loss and weight management and all of that stuff. And so if we're going to just put you on another diet, we're just really reinforcing this idea that you need to lose weight for some odd reason or another. And we're really not understanding the behaviors around how you're engaging with food. We're not understanding the connection. So basically what we're doing is observing. We do a lot of observing, really looking at your patterns. So when people come, they're like, okay, just tell me what to do, because at this point I'm fed up. I'm desperate. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, the thing that you're going to do is nothing. You're actually going to observe, because we need to take a moment, sit down, sit back, and become mindful around the things that you're doing, because a lot of what we do around food is on autopilot and habit. And so we want to be to look at those things. And so that's kind of the pre-work that we do, and kind of the front-facing work.
Love it. You know, that's so scientific because I've just written books about food, but there's the science behind food that I'm sure you're aware of, but I don't know if the listeners and your listeners are aware of this, but up to 85 to 90% of our digestion of food, the assimilation of nutrients, is controlled by your mind. So your mind literally drives the ability from when you put the food into your mouth to when you actually get it into your cells and get that nutrition. So if you are all toxic and worked up and worried about your body image, or worried about that fight you had with your husband, or that issue at work with your whatever colleague, and or worried about what's going on around you, and also worrying about what we're living in in this current climate with all the racism going on, and it affects the emotions, which then affects our digestion, and we can lose up to 85% of nutrition. So that's just interesting that it's so important. I said that just to undergird what you said about the fact that you have to first observe and see what are you doing, what's the thinking behind the meal, as opposed to just diving in and then 9 out of 10 diets, I'm sure you're aware of this, 9 out of 10 diets fail anyway. It's when you bring your mind into the game and it's not trying to diet, then you're going to start getting, you have it's a connection, as you say. It's not a set of rules that people are going to definitely break.
Yes. And when we are working with people, a lot of people are coming in with this idea that they are bad because they can't stick to it. And so I love the stats that you're bringing up about 9 out of 10 diets fail. And most people think that that's because they are causing them to fail. And they don't really understand all of the emotions behind it. They don't understand the body mechanism, the mind. They don't understand all of that, but they begin to turn that inward and blame themselves. And so it's undoing a lot of that stuff and unlearning and removing ourselves from that guilt and shame and responsibility of the diet failing when so many other factors are
involved in the process. Yeah. It starts with the mind. I always say eating is a metacognitive event. And I always say to people that there's only one rule for eating, and that's eat real food mindfully. Get your mind into the game, eat real food, and then the other things. And that's a relationship. It's like you're saying, it's a connection with food. So I love your approach. Okay, you put up such a great post today. I'm just going to read the post and then let's unpack it a little bit, and then we'll go into some other things. You said, repeat after me, my worth is not determined by my body size. My value is not determined by how snatched my waist is. I like that word. My character is not tied to how many calories I consume. I'm good enough just as I am without any mention of my weight or body. And then you go on to explain that. So just talk about that post and you had some really cute little concepts that I'm going to pull out of you. You'll probably cover all of them.
Yeah. So that post was actually for me.
Now the honesty comes out.
So people don't really. I like to show up authentic.
Hey, do you take your own advice? I have to ask you. Okay,
sometimes I do take my own advice, and sometimes I'm the worst client ever because I know too much, right? And at least that's what I tell myself. Yeah. But that post was actually for me because I've struggled with weight my entire life, I would say, and my body image. And so I used to have a problem, and some feedback that I got in supervision before is that I like to appear competent. I like to appear that I have it all together. And what I found in working with clients, especially around body image and weight, is that people need to know that you don't have it all together and that you're not some perfect being that's just sitting over here judging them or telling them what to do. So what I found is that if I tap into my authentic experience and I speak from that place, that reaches and resonates so much with people. And so when I post those tweets, those are mostly tweets from either my own experiences or moments I've had with clients or realizations I've come to. And so those tweets are coming from that place. And so that one specifically is super authentic and transparent, actually. So that post was a reminder to myself when I'm feeling judgy about my own body and comparing my body against other people who I see or ways that I think my body should meet an ideal, is that no, you are good enough by yourself. If nobody ever notices your weight, if your waist is never snatched, if you do have the back rolls that you have, the back fat, you are good enough just like that. And so I meet so many women who say, and I actually just had a client 2 weeks ago say, if I could just get my butt to match the rest of my body, then that would be. I was like, you are good enough, even if your butt does not match, even if there's no sign of it. You by yourself are good enough. And so I want people to understand that a lot of our worth, and this is what diet industry does. Yeah. A lot of our worth has been connected to the food that we eat, the shape that we are, how many calories we consume and burn. And so our values have been placed in skinniness, and that has been tied to attractiveness, that has been tied to beauty, And all of that is wrapped up in this ideal perfect body image that somehow is going to make us good enough at some point if we can just reach it. And so I needed to send a reminder, not only to myself, but to other people, that we are good enough and our worth is not determined by how many calories we consume. Our value is not like the snatchness of our waist. And I made that word up, snatchness.
That's what caught my attention. It works though.
But I didn't make up snatched, but I made up the snatchness of my waist.
Yeah.
Does not mean anything about me as a person. And I think that we're reinforced for smallness, and then the validation, the external validation that happens can reinforce this idea that if we look a certain way, then that means that we are valuable in some way. And I just want to remind people and myself at times that has nothing to do. One has nothing to do with the other. And if we stop placing our value and worth there, we can really diminish a lot of the shame and guilt that we carry about the ways that our bodies look.
Oh, that's so good. And that's tied directly into identity. And, you see with the research I do, that when people's identity is compromised for whatever reason, and in the case that we're talking about now, the ideal body from the diet industry and so on, and the movies and everything, we get a very low energy. You can see it on the brain scans. You get very low energy just above my eyebrows in that part of the brain. And that's the part of the brain that is very active as we are making decisions and making choices and having insight and that kind of stuff. So when that drops down in energy, it's not working so that means your brain's not working like it should. So when we feel bad about ourselves, immediately we'll see a drop in brain function in that area, and then that then drops your ability to actually judge your value in the correct way. And so you have this because your mind works through your brain. So if your brain's not doing what it should, so you've got to kind of use your mind to fix your mind. So you've got to say these kind of statements that you said. You've got to actually make these statements let me get back to it. You've got to say these kind of things that you say to actually and believe them. And it's almost like you're teaching yourself. And in that, you can see an almost immediate shift when people's identity changes. You see an immediate shift in this area where there's an increase. And then the more you start believing it, the more you then are able to get more insightful and start recognizing, hey, it's not my body shape that's the determinant of my value. It's me as a person. Me as a person, I'm valuable, and all that kind of stuff that you say. So I just thought I'd throw in some brain science.
Just that information. I feel like I love science, and this is one of the reasons why I love it, is because if you just understand that this is so much bigger than just you not looking like another picture. There are so many things at play. So much is happening in the body. And if we just understood how that impacts us, we will free ourselves up so much of the responsibility we have. And when we are thinking about ourselves in a way and allowing ourselves to just be, how empowering is that to understand that when I think better about myself, I can show up better, I can behave better, I function better. And that is just so empowering. And so you can gain so much control from that versus the other way around, where we feel like we're completely powerless.
Exactly. And it's so toxic that, it affects everything. It isn't just isolated in one area. It tends to permeate all our behaviors and patterns and everything. So that really comes directly to the point of dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, which you also work, which is pretty much what you've just described. So maybe if you could just quickly define body dysmorphia and how you help to sort of deal with that.
Absolutely. It's the person's image of themselves that does not line up. It's a complete perception, right? So we're talking about what is perceived versus what is real. Yeah. So it's a person's perceived image of themselves is flawed and as different than what is actually based in reality. Yeah. Simple as that. They see something different than what is based in reality. Mm-hmm. And the work that I do with clients around body dysmorphia and body image issues is taking into account, let's tease apart what is real and what is perceived. And basically, let's look at the evidence that you have about the things that you are kind of saying about your body as is related to the flaws that you feel like it has. Where did you learn that those things were flaws? What does that mean about you if we connect this body image that you think you have, this image that you have and these things that you think are wrong with you, what does that mean about you? What does that mean about you as a person in society? And we just kind of dig. And where did you learn that? And a lot of it goes back to family of origin. And kind of a lot of that goes back to what they were taught from their family of origin. And so we just kind of keep digging until we're just basically challenging people's perceptions, really. We do the same thing with anxiety. It's
same thing. There's a cause. Yeah.
We're challenging the perspective. We're challenging is this real? Is this based in reality? What evidence do you have? And exposure, what it would look like to wear a pair of shorts? What are the thoughts that come to mind when you think about yourself in shorts? What are the thoughts that come to mind when you see yourself on the picture? So we're doing a lot of exposure type of things, a lot of challenging those thoughts that come up.
That's excellent. It's like I've got this little toxic tree over here, which I always use for thoughts, because thoughts are real things. They're actually things you build in your brain. And so if you've got this body image, this body dysmorphia image of yourself, that perception is wrong. So you actually have to embrace that and reconceptualize that into the reality. And that takes work, but it takes an awareness first. Because you see from neuroscience that, it works. And then here's a healthy one. I use this all the time. So there's a healthy one. So that's the healthy thought. And a thought is a tree. And it's a concept. And trees have got lots of branches. Each of those branches is representing all the different memories in the thought. So there's the thing of, I don't have a good body image, but there's all the stuff inside there. So when you're doing that work that you're talking about of why do I have this image, that's all going to come out over there. But that's the healthy one. You've got to dig this stuff out and get it to that. And that's what you're doing. There's a little bit of science behind the what you've just explained. It's always nice to have those visuals and the link back to the brain science.
And I'm smiling so hard because you're my type of provider. I love to talk in analogies. I love to talk in metaphors, and I love to talk in like showing people things, because I'm also a visual learner. So the way that you're thinking about these things and the way that you're explaining them is right up my alley.
Oh, good. And people love it. People respond because people love science. So as soon as you know that you aren't your brain, you control it. You aren't a victim of your biology. You can change those things. It's a really empowering thing to be able to do, which is so cool. Okay, so what are some of the main issues that you see coming up in your practice? So
So I work from a trauma lens. So I do a lot of trauma recovery work. I started this work working in military sexual trauma. So I used to work with veterans and working around helping them to reclaim their power. And so when you're working with people who have been traumatized, sexually abused, betrayed, and taken advantage of at the hands of someone else, you have a lot of confidence issues. So there's a lot of confidence building. There's a huge lack of trust in self. There's a lot of loss of power. So feeling like you can't control anything. There's a lot of fear that we work around. There's a lot of self-blame and guilt. Those may be the two biggest things that we work on.
Self-blame and guilt.
Self-blame and guilt. Blaming yourself, taking responsibility for what somebody else did to you, not being able to trust yourself to take care of yourself or to take care of other people and to keep them safe. So safety becomes an issue. And working with women, a lot of intimacy issues with intimacy and relationships. So I work a lot around how to interact with yourself, how to show up in relationships with other people. We work on effective communication. So how to ask for what you want to need. Because if you know anything about confidence and trust, is that if you don't trust yourself, you don't really have confidence. It's really hard to ask somebody else for something. Absolutely. It's really hard to make a case and basically advocate for yourself for what you need. So those are the core issues: sexuality, all of those issues. And now, because I work in Texas, and the area where I live in Austin is majority white. And we are getting a lot of tech things here. And Black women in tech is a thing because that treatment is so different. So we began to do a lot of work around racial trauma. And trauma work is transferable. There are some nuances with sexual trauma and racial trauma, but a lot of trauma work is actually transferable, and a lot of similarities there. So working around racial trauma and helping people to understand how to work through that, how to recover, how to regain their power, because any type of trauma wipes your power away from you. At least that's the purpose of it. And so helping you to regain that power, helping you to stand in that, and helping you to learn how to advocate for yourself and have a voice. Those, I will say, those are the main things that come up.
Main things. Okay, well, so let's talk a little bit about what do you do with the racial trauma, just a little bit, and then also the self-blame. That's very, very, very significant. I'm so glad you've mentioned that, and that's something that we haven't spoken about on a podcast for a while with people, but that self-blame thing, that is incredibly linked to identity and value, and it's so common, isn't it? I mean, that is really something that is very, very common. So could we talk just a little bit about both of those and how you would handle them? And some advice, techniques or something. Yeah. They're basically intertwined. And so when you hear even racial trauma, right, I think that the tendency, here's your brain person. So here's how I see our brain working. So this is part of the education that I do. I love educating and love providing context. Yeah. So what I do is when people come in with trauma and they are presenting with some self-blame and kind of taking the responsibility of what has happened to them, I kind of paint this picture for them that the brain likes a complete picture. The brain doesn't like anything to be incomplete. We like to see the entire picture. Our brain does. And so when there's not a complete picture, the brain looks for information in your environment to help fill in those holes. Even if that puzzle piece doesn't fit, the brain plugs it in.
most times in anxiety, the anxious brain, I should say, plugs it in. And the anxiety, well, the only piece that it has many times are your puzzle pieces, the person's puzzle pieces. And so when the anxious brain is scanning the environment for how can I fill in this puzzle to make it make sense? Because the anxious brain needs logic. Like, even though it's purely emotion, it needs logic. And so it says, okay, so what puzzle pieces do you have available to you? You were there. That happened to you. You must be the reason for it. Puzzle piece filled. And so then in this picture, you begin to say, oh, so that was my fault. And also, if we have other similar pieces laying around that we've kind of used in the past, or we blamed ourselves for things that have happened in the past, it makes sense. It's like, okay, so if it was your fault then it's your fault now. And so that self-blame piece and understanding that you're making this, you want to make sense of this because making sense of it gives you control. If we know how it happened, if we know what happened, we can control it from happening again. So in order to control it from happening again, we need the entire picture so we can scan it and make sense of it. And so the puzzle pieces are there. Those are your puzzle pieces. And so I caused this event. So therefore I can create it. I can stop it from happening again and create safety around that. So that's the part that we talk about is like, are you blaming yourself because you don't know how to make sense of it any other way? Or maybe you are blaming yourself because it makes more sense this way. Because we don't know why people do the things that they do. We can't make sense of why a supervisor pulled our scarves off of our heads at work and let another person, a male, wear a cap. We can't make sense of that. So maybe I wasn't being professional enough. Because we know professional is also rooted for Black people is rooted in racism. Show up, be quiet, be straight, don't make waves, kind of be clean, be nice, and then show up in those ways. So maybe I wasn't doing it. Maybe I knew that by wearing a scarf to work, that was going to ruffle some feathers, and I did it anyway. I should have known better. And we are not taking into account.
Self-blame. Yeah.
That's the self-blame. And so that may be how it sounds to people who may not be aware of how that sounds. And we're not taking into account the other person's responsibility and role in that and why they did what they did. Many times we don't know why. We can't make sense of it. And so we want to make sense of it. And we just put the blame back on ourselves because that then says, okay, well, if I show up the next time, I know better. So I don't have to worry about that public humiliation again. I don't have to worry about my scarf being taken off. And so we basically just work around. Why are you telling yourself this? Where did this come from? Also, where did you learn to blame yourself for things like this? Again, family of origin. Well, I remember when I was little and my mom told me, or my dad told me that that's the reason that they were leaving. And I felt like I was the reason that my parents got a divorce because I got an F in school. So if you have this core belief that things are your fault, then it's really easy to then, as an adult, wrap your mind around things being your fault as well when you have similar experiences. So even in racial trauma, we do a lot of historic context, basically providing education around racism and professionalism in the workplace and respectability politics. Like, I'm supposed to be professional. I can't wear my hair like this. I need to relax my hair. I'm supposed to be nice. I can't be the angry Black woman. So a lot of putting things in its proper context helps people to feel validated, because that's huge. When people disclose trauma to us, one of the main things in research, it shows that the disclosure process is one of the main things that can predict, or one of the main predictors of whether or not that person recovers or kind of spirals, right? Because if you're disclosing something and somebody says, oh, you should have worn that then, or how many drinks did you drink, or that didn't happen, don't tell anybody else that, then you're likely to spiral. You're likely to feel ashamed. You're likely to feel guilty. But if you disclose and a person says, nobody had a right to put their hands on you, you absolutely can wear what you want to wear, that does not invite in things to happen to you, then you feel more seen, you feel heard, you feel validated. Same goes for racial trauma. So when you're experiencing something, you want to check it out, and the person who you're disclosing it to, you want them to say, no, that doesn't make any sense. You're allowed to experience a range of emotions just like anybody else. Exactly. And anger is an emotion. And if you feel angry about something, you're allowed to feel angry instead of feeling like you need to be quiet all the time. So, it's basically validating them and normalizing their experiences and putting those things in context is super helpful. And it makes them feel seen. It helps them to feel heard. And it feels like they, aren't, this is what they tell me, so I'm not losing my mind. I was like, no, you're not. This was actually a real experience for you. And this actually happened to you. And so calling it out and labeling is super healing for so many people.
So many. And also that other, just to add to that, you've explained that so well, by the way, it's so well done. But if you now next time go in and you don't wear the scarf, you've actually also done something to yourself, because now you've put yourself in the back room and now you're compromising, and that leads to all the cognitive dissonance and also undervalues you. So it's like, and then so you need to have a safe space where you can go and talk about, this is the experience that happened to me. How can I deal with that? And not everyone is getting to therapy, but now that there's things like podcasts and YouTube, we can at least make these kind of things, spaces available for people to be able to learn this and get educated and express. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, and it's to help, because that's also terrible if you suddenly compromise and you put on this front, because that's what is required socially, and it's the wrong social norm anyway.
Yeah, it's stressful. It's stressful.
Yeah, it's terrible. Your body,
inauthentic all the time. I know that there are different contexts, and we have to show up in certain ways depending on the context. But to think about the place where we spend the most amount of our time to always show up inauthentic and compromise yourself, that is highly stressful. And people don't realize that, just being repeatedly triggered really takes a toll on your body. It really takes a toll on your psyche. Yeah.
Oh, no, it does. I mean, this is the most recent clinical trials I did. We saw, I mean, there's so many things I could share with you, but just everyone's familiar with cortisol. And we say soon when you end up living under that kind of stress constantly, you basically increase your cortisol levels. And cortisol is a good thing. Everyone thinks it's like a bad thing because everyone talks about cortisol and stress, but cortisol is a very necessary part of your biochemistry, or you die. But if it's in the wrong quantities, it then affects the immune system. It also affects things like homocysteine, and the combination affects your hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is there to actually help you stay focused and alert, etc. But that gets all off whack, and suddenly your body's filled with inflammatory issues and so on. So it really does, it has a direct effect. And we saw in my studies, in as short as a few weeks, we saw cortisol changes and down. So when people manage, like the techniques you're describing, that's basically mind management. When people get into managing, talking about getting some level of understanding, then you can actually get the cortisol levels back down. You can get the homocysteine levels back down. But if not, if you're living under that state of constant high levels of the wrong chemicals in your body, you put homocysteine, for example, directly affects your heart and can set you up for dementias, and affects your immune system. And so there's a very real physical effect. If people are feeling that pain in their heart, it's real. It's not like you're making something up. And you said something earlier on that was so significant. You spoke about the brain and the puzzles. I like your analogy. I love that. And your brain is requiring coherence between the left and the right side. So the exact balance, so the filling in the pieces of the puzzle, your mind's doing that because your brain energy starts changing if you don't have a complete picture, because it's an imbalance. And the left side sees detail to big picture, and right side big picture to detail. And so what we want to do is have coherence in the way that the brain waves flow through the brain. So when you have the wrong perception, or you're shoving yourself in the back room with that analogy, or you are you've got this perception and you've put all this incorrect information in, that creates pockets of anxiety across the brain. And you see we call a red brain. You'll see pockets of anxiety across the brain, and sometimes there's a huge flare in different parts. But as soon as you manage it, you change that. So there's evidence. What I'm saying is that we see direct evidence of change. So this is real. So what you're saying is real. It's not like, oh, this is just psychological stuff. This is real. When you actually use your mind to change your brain, you change your brain. It does change physically, structurally, your physiology changes. So this is such important information. People need to really listen and realize that, it's hard work, but there's so much help out there to help people to be able to do this kind of thing. You also work in the LGBTQ community, and that's a big issue, body dysmorphia as well. And it's very common in marginalized communities. We spoke about that on the live a little bit as well. We just touched on that, how it's really, it's a big issue everywhere, but it's a big issue in marginalized communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about kind of like eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and that stuff in the LGBTQ plus community. So what happens is a lot of people in that community, I mean, largely, if we just look within our society, we're even fighting for equal rights, right? We're still fighting for equal rights, which means that a large part of society doesn't see this population as equal. And so when you don't see a population as equal, you're also sending the message that population isn't good enough.
Yes.
That population is not right. Something's wrong. Something's morally wrong. And so if you're seeing the entire population that way, and the majority of our society is thinking that way, then what do you think that does at the individual level? It creates this idea even more so that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Like I'm morally wrong. my body size, my type is wrong. And so you begin to internalize a lot of these judgments. You begin to internalize a lot of these biases, a lot of these stereotypes that come with it. And if you don't see yourself as morally right and things are wrong with you, then you begin to pick at things associated with yourself to make yourself more right. And so body image begins to take a hit. And so that's where you may find people start trying to control their appetite, start trying to control their bodies for sake of looking good enough. And so if I feel inherently good enough.
Good enough. I want to just good enough. That enough thing. So it's like, and it's gut wrenching. I mean, the pain of not being recognized for who you are, it's destructive to your soul. It takes away all your hope. It's the core of who we are. We want to know we're valued. So you remove that from whole huge sectors of society.
I mean, we want to know that we're valued, but when you have a history of being told that you are the hugest problem ever, and I don't want to use the word sin because I don't want to reinforce that it's a sin because it's not, but being told that you are basically blasphemy, basically you are the biggest thing to ever go wrong is like you're just I don't even know the word I'm looking for, but
I know what you see.
Being a murderer and being gay, you can almost be a murderer before you're gay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most of the kids that are, I mean, that's true. That is what you said there is so true, and it's so wrong. I mean, most of the kids that are homeless on the street are gay Christian kids that have been kicked out of their homes.
Because what they have done has completely shattered the family. And so if you're having to shoulder that amount of responsibility, you definitely don't see yourself as good enough, confident. And what ways have we been taught in society to correct ourselves if we're not good enough? Eat better, change your body image,
external.
Be pretty enough, external, be pretty enough, be beautiful enough.
To try and hide behind that.
Yeah, you'll be accepted, right? And then within the community itself, there's bias around body size. There's this image of as we talk about males, there's this image of the chiseled male body.
Yeah.
And that is just not realistic. And so you have a lot of these images that people are kind of used to seeing and then internalizing a lot of that bias, a lot of those stereotypes. And it creates a lot of body image issues, body dysmorphia, eating disorders. And then we talk about homelessness, and then you have food insecurity. All of these issues within the population are sort of adding to these body image issues and these eating problems. So it's hugely deeply rooted in sexuality and acceptance and just being accepted for who you are and being recognized for a whole person, regardless of who you decide to love or who your heart loves and that kind of thing, or attraction and what you present as, just like being recognized as a whole individual instead of being sort of making that the entire part of who you are.
Yeah.
I think it actually it's life sucking and drains so much out of people. It's
heartbreaking.
So it's heartbreaking, and so much so that you would find people wanting to kill themselves because of it.
Very, very high suicide rates.
High suicide rates. So we have a lot of mental health issues, a lot of anxiety around kind of like safety because people are killing, especially trans people, gay people. So if you're kind of thinking about my safety, am I going to run up against somebody who's not going to like me because of my choice in love or my preference or what I'm naturally and physically attracted to or emotionally or spiritually attracted to, then they're going to punish me for that.
Yeah, the safety is removed, the value is removed, the hope is removed. And then there's all this scary fear mongering of, things like you're going to go to hell and you've got to choose, forcing parents. I've had so many parents that have spoken to me about how they were literally told by church leaders that you choose your child or you go to force your child or they're going to go to hell. And these parents are choosing the church over the children. I just don't get it. I don't get if God is love and goodness and godness is loveness.
Exactly.
Like, really? I mean, if it's one of my favorite people is Jen Hatmaker, and she says if your religion is hurting other people, you need to ask yourself some deep questions, and what is love? And I often ask people, what does love look like? And love doesn't look like having a chiseled body that you're trying to hide behind just for acceptance, but it's become that because it's one of the quickest things that people can try to control, isn't it? So if they won't accept me for being gay or whatever it may be, but if I make my body beautiful, then I'll be accepted. And then there's all those issues. So there's two issues. You're dealing with two massive issues, aren't you? One on top of each other. It's not just
so complex. And I mean, this is probably a whole nother episode that that you can probably kind of tap into. But I think for a large part, religion is based in perfectionism. And so we're looking to be perfect. And so when you see people choosing church over children, they're choosing perfectionism. They're choosing rightness. They're choosing morally right. No, there's no love in that.
No love in that.
And we have to be careful about some of the messages that religion as a whole sends about love and God's love being perfect, or you needing to be perfect in order to be deserving.
It sounds like Zeus. It doesn't sound like God. It sounds like it's like Zeus. You know, Zeus is going to zap you if you don't. Yeah, Zeus.
Right? It's like that. That doesn't even make any sense. So God is not going to love you if you're not perfect enough. So I think we've got to begin to think critically about that. And I love that you just that simple phrase: if God is love, that is not love. So if that is not love, that is not God.
That is not God. If someone is wanting to kill themselves because of that, if someone's wanting to completely change everything about what they physically look like and who they are, and they can't do it, number one, then there's obviously no love in that. That's wrong. God is love. Loveness is acceptance. And that's why I'd like to talk about Godness and loveness, because God is love. So Godness and loveness, you know, so that's, as you say, this is another whole discussion, which we're definitely going to be doing at some point, because this is like so important. So you're working a lot with the Black community that's LGBT plus, and that's even like a double whammy, isn't it? I mean,
oh yeah, so many complexities, so many intersectionalities. Like it's so unique. Like there's a lot of uniqueness, and part of the issue that I choose to work in this area is because access to quality care is not vast.
No.
And so there are so many complexities, and it's not enough to have somebody who is culturally competent in one area and not culturally competent in another. When you're presenting with multiple identities, the issues are way complex. The way that they present the issues that arise are way complex. So even myself, I have to ask myself, like, are you culturally competent to deal with this? And I have to say no sometimes, because there's so much for me to learn as people evolve and as we learn more about identity and gender and all of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know it all. And so just imagine that people who feel like they identify, let's just take trans people, for example. I don't feel completely competent in that. Yet if there's a Black trans person in Austin who needs help, I don't feel completely competent in that. But I'm only one of very few Black psychologists here
that are working with
LGBTQ plus community like that. And so just think about that's just here. That's just here. I'm not saying I'm the only Black provider, but we think about the population and the complexities. I'm probably one of many. I'm probably one out of many other providers who see Black people, but then it gets narrow and more narrow when you think about Black women, Black marginalized communities, thinking about members of the LGBTQ plus community. Like the more you chisel down, working in racial trauma, the providers just aren't there.
So this is where we have to create community. It is terrible. First of all, that's just terrible and it's unacceptable. And secondly, this is why it's so good that we can create an awareness and create communities and forums and platforms where we can have a more community approach to mental health, where people can feel safe to go and talk, and spaces where they can go and talk and be accepted. And, you know, thank goodness for people like you, thank goodness. But as you say, what about the people that are too scared to even show up at your offices because of the stigma they have, the family? And we have to be able to create an accessible way of helping people to feel that they can safely speak about what they're going through, because it's terribly heartbreaking. I mean, some of the emails that we get and messages we get are it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And part of the work that I do is also encouraging providers to do their own work. Like it's not enough that
get educated.
Get educated, because we call ourselves culturally competent if we worked with a particular population before. That doesn't make us culturally competent. What makes us culturally competent is that we get in there and understand the nuances, that we get in there and we understand the complexities, that we meet people where they are, that we are actually trying to immerse ourselves in understanding our own biases. Because as providers, we sometimes take this stance that we don't have flaws and that we kind of all-knowing kind of savior complex. And we have flaws, and there are things that we don't know. And so we have to get in there and do the work and recognize that, hey, because you can't undo your own upbringing either. And you're bringing that in the room like, hey, I do have some biases about people who are in non-monogamous relationships. I do have biases about people who want to practice polygamy. Like I do have these, and I need to address those if I want to serve this particular population, and I want to serve people who are in different types of relationships and people who present with different types of gender identities or different identities. I want to be able to understand that And it's not enough to say, well, I have one client who presents that way, so I'm competent. No, we've got to get in there and do the work and begin to immerse ourselves in things and understand better and do our own work. It's no different than providers doing their racism work and saying, hey, I have been impacted by this. I don't have a choice but to, and I got to get in there and
go study the books, go read the books.
Go read the books, go immerse yourself.
Get educated, do some brain building, learn about it so that you can actually say the right thing, do the right thing. And even then you're going to do the wrong thing. So have the conversations when you, as you educate, converse, isn't it? Go into that and see what the needs are and get yourself, it's education. And it's an organic process. An ongoing organic process. We never know it all. The minute a therapist or anyone thinks that they know it all, they're a bad therapist, or they're kind of, you've hit that complacency level. Growth is necessary, isn't it? In every,
it's definitely necessary. Yeah. We have to get comfortable with being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know, and I need to figure it out, and I'm going to make some mistakes, and calling that out with your client and saying, hey, there's some things that I bring to this dynamic that I know is going to impact your ability to reach your goals. And I'm willing for you to call that out. I'm willing to sit in that discomfort. And not enough of us are willing to be uncomfortable in the room with the client because we're taught that clients are the ones who have the problems. And no, therapists, psychologists, providers, doctors, we all have issues. And we need to be able to sit in that so that we create a human experience and be able to say, I may not have gotten that right then. I'm working to figure that out so that we can get it right going forward.
That's vital. The God complex of the medical world and the biomedical model's got to stop because, one physician a day is committing suicide because they can't handle the stress. I mean, I train physicians in how to deal with mental health in themselves and in their clients. And they're not trained, physicians aren't trained with mental health, but that's the first go-to that people will go to. And then it's just a label and a medication. But that's not the solution. So we've got to take away the God complex. As you said, you trained in the training that we all receive if we're in this dimension of mental health, clinical, medical. It is that you, the authority figure, that person doesn't know what you know, you've got to tell them to do. That day is over. We can't do that. It's not the way of Eastern medicine either. Eastern medicine is very much about, we've got to have a marriage of Eastern and Western medicine, and we've got to go back to much more of a spiritual approach if we're going to help people. We've got to get back our humanity again. I think we've almost dehumanized. Medicine's become a bit dehumanized, and doctors will I work with plenty of doctors, and they'll tell you that. But psychology shouldn't have, but it's become, in a lot of cases, dehumanized. I mean, I'm lucky. I interview people like you, but I've had in my career contact with plenty of people in the mental health world. And sometimes I think, the God complex. And I don't think, it's not that they're trying to be a bad person or dominate, but it's just that we've got to get off this ivory tower. I know the solution. You don't. Yes, you've got education, but you're still not an expert on that person. You're still not an expert on their experience. All you there is to facilitate. I'm going on my bandwagon too.
No, you're right. You're right up my alley. I always tell people I have a huge problem with providers who can't call attention to the ways that they see themselves as all-knowing. That is not okay. You are not all-knowing. You don't get a chance to, my hugest issue is around trauma and providers defining what trauma is for people. I had supervisors before tell me that particular clients, that's not trauma. That's tragedy, but that's not trauma. You don't get a chance to tell somebody what's traumatic in their life. That is not up to you.
No ways.
It's a thing that significantly disrupts a person's life. You don't get to tell anybody what that is.
Exactly.
People get to define trauma in ways that feel good for them and feels validating for them. I think for us as providers to go in and say, well, actually, you didn't experience a trauma. That was just a really difficult time for you. That's completely invalidating and minimizing.
Yeah, totally.
We don't get a right to do that. We don't get a right to sit in a position that's high up and say, I get to tell you what you are and you don't get it. And that is what happens many times.
Oh, it does.
Black people, brown people, marginalized groups, is that they are faced with these providers who think that they know best for their lives. And that is not okay.
Wow. It makes me think that we should have, and it's definitely not time in this conversation, but about the whole concept of conversion therapy and things like that, which is another one of, the dangers of that and the impact of that. And just also that I know it's not directly related to what you just said, but it's another example of someone saying, this is the only way, therefore you have to do this to change. And it just made me think of that. So much of psychological therapies have been like that. And the medical world that works very well for the heart issues and the, the physical symptoms and so on, diabetes and cardiovascular and immune, it's outstanding for an emergency medicine. That doesn't apply to things of the mind. You can't bring that same model over, but that's the model that's been adopted, and it's been really absorbed by psychology and psychiatry and mental health and that kind of thing, which is very sad because it's taken away it creates that God complex, that authority complex, and you've got to do this in 10 sessions of CBT. Why aren't you better yet? There's something wrong with you. You have a broken brain. You have a neuropsychiatric brain disease. I mean, this is not helping anyone. And I love what you said, which is so valid, of the fact that if something's a trauma for someone, to turn around, that person to turn around and say, oh, that's not a trauma, that's just a whatever. It's an insult to a person's story. You can't do that. You've got to be so careful of removing that. If you don't think it's a tragedy, well, that's not your business anyway. It's for that person it is. And if you're trying to help, none of us have the right to invalidate anyone else. And I think the time has come for us, it's got to stop. There's too much invalidation of, I've just finished my 18th book, and I have a whole little section in there where I talk about how we've got to stop invalidating people's stories and whatever. So we've got to make a change. That's what you and I are doing.
Yes, because it starts with us. In a mental health field, a lot of people don't even recognize. A lot of people really in society don't even understand the many differences in the mental health field between just psychologists, psychiatrists, family and marriage therapists, or marriage and family
licensed counselor,
and licensed clinical social worker. There are so many different names for us and different fields that we work in, all under this mental health umbrella. And we're holding all of that information, just disseminating it mostly within the mental health field. Regular, general public does not even know the differences. No. So we've got to do better with disseminating that information and making sure that people understand the differences, and so that they're educated. But because we like to, again, it's that God complex. We like to sit and brag on ourselves. We're too busy kind of disseminating information amongst ourselves, and we're not worried about getting it out to the people who it really matters to.
Exactly.
And so that's been my hang up with my organization as a whole, is that I can go to these conferences, but you're not getting that information to the people who look like me and the people who I work with.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We need to be getting that information out broader, and we're not doing a great job of that.
Oh, you're so right. I talk at a lot of these big mental health conferences, and you're quite right. It's very predominantly white, which is not right. And they're not dealing with the issues. And I'm thinking it's kind of like, you're getting more and more. What is the word when you keep getting more knowledge for yourself, but you're getting so full that you're not actually giving it to and there's also almost that threat. Well, if I educate the public, they won't come to me. Of course not, because your whole purpose of you getting educated is to give other people education. In Zimbabwe, where I was born in Zimbabwe, they have the Friendship Bench program, which has been shown to be one of the most effective mental health programs. And I used a version of it in my therapy when I worked in South Africa. I practiced there for 25 years. And I just brought in a sort of brain science version of it. But it really was taking the community. And it started with a granny one day sitting on a log in one of the tribes. And there's a whole thing, all these 11 million people, and there aren't enough psychiatrists. And thank goodness they're not there. Don't let them come in, because you don't need to drug more people. But what this woman did, and the study was actually, it was a whole scientific study once they found out about her. But bottom line is, she was just this granny who people would come and talk to, and her with their anxieties and there was no judgment. She just listened and would then give a pearl of wisdom, push in the right direction. But the person talked it through and worked it out. She had no qualifications. And this was observed because that particular tribe had such an effective mental health status. And so then it multiplied, and they did a whole study, and thousands of people were reached, and it was significant changes in mental health, significant to the point where Harvard picked up the study and that kind of thing. But of course, that hasn't been disseminated sufficiently across the world because there's no money in it. It's like you can't patent it, or you can't. But what people don't realize is that you need the professionals like yourself and like myself to be able to educate communities, so that communities can have bench therapy. I call it bench therapy, the version that I was teaching. And that's what we can do. And that's what the education can do. It can empower people it doesn't remove people's jobs, which is, I think, a lot of fear of a mental health specialist. It increases your influence but it just changes. It looks different. And, that's the new narrative that we really need to bring to mental health, is we've got to help people to help themselves. And we've got to use the people that have taken the time like yourself to be educated, that have experience. How many grannies could you teach? And I'm talking about grannies. How many people in communities could you teach? We got a couple of churches where they put benches outside the church where it's a a safe space. And these kids that will come there, it's in a very poor homeless community, and the kids come and sit there and they know if they sit there, they won't be judged. It's become a place of healing for people to go and sit, and that's what we can start trying to do. Listen, we have to wrap this conversation up. I've got to do another interview, but let's pick up on this. Let's dive in and do it and talk sometime about how we can change communities, how we can bring mental health. And there's a lot of dialogue around it, but there's more dialogue than action. So let's talk about dialogue that actually leads to action. So are you up for the challenge,
I am
Dr.
up
Ebony?
for the challenge. I am up for the challenge. I love this conversation. You are a woman after my own brain.
There you go. There you go. I'm so excited about this too. Well, thank you for your invaluable time and your fantastic pearls of wisdom. And it's been such a great conversation, one of many. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ebony. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll speak again soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.